Welcome to Ask Psych Sessions with Marianne Lloyd, where we ask some of the best teachers we know questions from you, our audience. This is a two-part series featuring interviews aimed at amplifying the conversation around equity, diversity, and inclusion in the classroom and in higher education. It is meant to be practical, to help everyday teachers like us identify and engage in steps toward inclusive pedagogical practices and systemic changes. No matter where you are in your understanding of equity, diversity, and inclusion, we think you will find these conversations helpful and enlightening. And now, please enjoy EDI Ask Psych Sessions with Marianne Lloyd.
Thanks for joining us. Today's guest in our mini-series on classroom conversations is Sara Gaither from Duke University. Thanks for joining us today, Sara.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So we're going to get into this idea of how to have classroom conversations around topics that some faculty might have avoided in the past, like racism, in a minute. But before we do that, could you just let everyone know what you typically teach, how big your classes are, what the topics are, and maybe sort of what your training is in, what area of psychology?
Yeah. So first, I am trained as a social psychologist, but I also do a lot of developmental work focusing on 3 to 7-year-olds. I'd like to think I'm a social developmental person, I guess, through my training. And I teach 3 main courses at Duke. One is the Diversity in Psychology Freshman Seminar. That's about 15 students or less. It's for first semester freshmen right when they get to Duke, to sort of help open their eyes to diversity issues and diversity questions we should be asking when reading different peer-reviewed articles across psychology. I also teach an Introduction to Social Psychology course. That's a 100-student course, one of our larger core courses for the psych major that I try to make really interactive with students actually collecting their own helping project data on campus to help them see behavior in real life. And the third class I tend to teach most often is my social identities course, which is what I'm teaching this fall. That's a course that is a writing course here at Duke, so it's 25 students or fewer, set up sort of as a lecture, but really through this course, students are not only writing about their own identities, but they're also assessing other people's identities, also through art, is some new ways I've thought about extending psychology research outside of the classroom to help students process those things in new ways. So lots of diversity focus in all of the courses that I teach. And I also have a very large undergraduate focused lab on my campus too. For anyone who has lab settings, we have usually around 20 undergraduates in addition to a couple of graduate students, all working in our lab collecting diversity related data from gender and racial identity issues, identity threat issues, things of that sort too.
Okay, well, I think that I don't even know which of those great classes to pick to start from, but I am super curious about this idea of a freshman seminar on this topic, partly selfishly because as someone that wants to bring this into upper division courses, it sounds like that gives students sort of a real vocabulary in the starting place. So can you just maybe give a couple minutes on what that looks like? How did that come about? Has it happened? Has it been around for a long time?
So this was a course that I developed when I started at Duke 4 years ago. And I really developed it because the whole reason I wanted to become a psychologist and study what I study is because I realized there's a lot of groups that are just simply left out of the conversation. We're either not measuring them or we're excluding them, or the sample sizes are so small that we can never analyze them as a separate outcome. And so over the years of my training, it made me very hyper aware that we really need to be pushing these discussions of who our research really represents and who it doesn't represent. Not to say past research is wrong, but just as a way to enhance critical thinking from the second college students enter a college campus. That critical thinking, racial empathy, thinking from other people's perspectives, I think is one of the core skills we need our college students to be developing over their 4 years. And so for me, this course is just a really nice opportunity across all types of psychology, clinical, social, developmental. We have pieces from all areas to really get students to start questioning, what do we really know and what do we not know?
And does that sort of framework of being kind of, let's look at the field and what the field is saying, do you find that helps students that might be reluctant to have conversations about diversity because they've sort of picked up this, I'll just sort of speak from my own perspective as a white woman, that sort of narrative that race isn't something you talk about. That's certainly how I was, raised in the 80s. So does this seem to be like a good way to get people there and ready to talk? When you talk about it from the field perspective, do you then find students are also talking about their own lived experiences?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of the two. I think first, we know for the average freshman going into college anywhere in the country, most of us are still living in pretty racially and ethnically and socio-income economic status segregated societies, right? And so moving to college is a super important identity period where you are often given the first time to interact with someone from a different racial background or sexual orientation background or whatever the case may be. And so having a classroom where the entire course content is focused on trying to discuss different aspects of diversity and how it influences our thought, how it influences our science, is something that I think students are really eager to learn how to do. And you, as an instructor, then are providing an actual course that is focused on these issues to give them that practice and experience, because that's really what causes most of these first time interactions to go horribly wrong. Is a lot of us don't have the practice of talking about race in the first place. So that's why our department thought it was a great idea to start a freshman seminar focusing on just basic issues of diversity and representation in psychological science. And it's been always a fully enrolled course. Students design their own projects to try and target a population that maybe hasn't been studied before or a question that hasn't been asked before. So it really gets them to think like a scientist from the moment they walk in the door.
That's really great. All right, I'm gonna after we're done recording, I'm gonna ask for a copy of the syllabus for sure, to think about how I can weave some of this into our freshman seminar, which is mostly about getting students, to know what the classes they have to take and what they might do when they're done. So this sounds like a really great piece that I will say that I am not doing. I won't speak for all my colleagues at that entry point level in my courses.
Happy to share.
I would like if you're if we can maybe pivot a bit into some of your research that touches on what you just mentioned, this idea that for those of us, most of us live in fairly homogenous spaces before college. I really enjoyed your work on looking at roommate interaction and how that can also maybe bring what's happening in their dormitories is going to come into the classroom and maybe also assist with this. Could you just tell the listeners a little bit about what you found in looking at people's housing arrangements?
Yeah, so this work started actually when I was a graduate student at Tufts University, which is another predominantly white campus similar to Duke in some ways. And so what we found in my first work was that if you were a white first-year student who was randomly assigned to live in the dorms with anyone but another white roommate, so you could be living with a Black person, a Latino person, or an Asian person, that positive experience of living with someone from another racial or ethnic background at the end of your freshman year, when I brought you into the lab to meet a Black student you've never met before, that interaction went amazingly well in comparison to students who had been living with another white roommate. So this, again, is getting at that notion of practice. These students who are living in diverse living spaces are really getting added practice and added benefits and being able to talk about diversity issues and navigate future diverse spaces. We've just now finished replicating all of these results at Duke in a different college campus. So this isn't just unique to Tufts. It seems like any positive cross-group experience in this super meaningful dorm environment really does have powerful impacts on students' attitudes and behaviors. And we're also showing that these things help not just white students, but also students of color as well. So we're still in the process of analyzing all of our data at Duke. And what we're excited about doing is actually seeing how this upcoming fall, with COVID restrictions, if we have virtual roommates, will we be able to see the same types of outcomes for students that might not necessarily have that same on-campus experience as in the past?
Wow, now that is right. There's a external validity question that you probably couldn't have predicted you were going to get to ask. The idea of a virtual roommate. So that's good. Thank you for talking a bit about having that conversation, practice helping. So do you also, in your classes, obviously you're giving students lots of chances to practice having these conversations. Do you find that you're just very explicit about that this is what you're doing, or you let things happen organically, just in terms of if a faculty member is kind of new to bringing these questions into their class? Are you sort of just put it on the table, listen, one of my unofficial goals of this class is for you to practice having these conversations, or you just sort of let it happen?
Yes, I think for my courses, I'm also biracially identified. I have a Black father and a white mother. So I also have kind of a unique perspective, I think. And for people who are only white identifying as faculty, I realize these discussions can be trickier sometimes or more foreign in comparison to someone like myself who has really just been exposed to diversity in some different ways. But I do, in all of my syllabi and on that first day of class, as students are class shopping, I do say, this is a class where we're going to talk about X, Y, and Z. I really want you all to be able to be in this course. I realize this may be harder for some of you than others. I realize some of you may have more personal connections than others, but this is an opportunity for us to learn from each other, and really trying to highlight a lot of the benefits that come from diverse thoughts, and really saying that you don't have to agree with anything that we go over in the class, but I do expect students to listen. And so if students are not ready to listen about aspects of diversity, whether it's about politics or race or gender, this might not be the class for you. And so it does lead to a selection bias, I think, of students in some ways. But I also want to make sure that the class is comprised of students who are willing to have these conversations. Because I think what becomes hard in a classroom dynamics is when you bring up sensitive topics and you have some students who really just never want to engage, it creates a very different teaching dynamic. So that's some of the kind of not warnings, but just setting out the truth for the students from that first day of class so they really know what they're getting themselves into.
Yeah, I think that's nice. I like that framing, right? That students, they're then actively making a choice. This is not an experiment, right? So we don't want to force people to be in a control group where they're going to, possibly do or say things that are going to harm other students, right? That idea of your classroom space, I spent a lot of time hoping that I'm making it a space where everyone feels like they belong and welcome and can have good input. So I think that's a nice approach.
Yeah, it gives students a chance to have agency, right, in their class choices. And I don't think it would be right for faculty to secretly embed diversity issues and discussions into their class without students knowing that ahead of time. I think all students should want to take these courses, but that's why I think that framing on your first day of diversity being this benefit in different ways, and maybe sometimes even avoiding the word diversity depending on the school climate you're in. I know some schools, the word diversity can be triggering for some students. And so finding out what language works for your university campus, I think, is really key in starting these types of courses.
Great. I'm going to end on that really helpful note to sort of think about what your institution is like and, figure out who you can ask if you're not quite sure about things just yet. Thank you so much for your time and your insights. And I hope that people will also look up that roommate work. I know my students really enjoy reading that article. It's kind of the last one we do in the semester. So it leaves things on a nice positive note. Unless you have one more thing you'd like to tell the listeners.
I think the only other thing I would tell anyone who's trying to work on their new syllabi for the fall, these are issues that students are thinking about all the time. I think with our current climates, with Black Lives Matter protests, so the upcoming election this fall, these are things, whether you teach chemistry or psychology, that are going to be on students' minds. And it's our duty as faculty, I think, to make sure we are showing how we feel about the issues going on in our world while also providing students a chance to talk about these experiences and to learn from each other. Because I think that's where we've gone wrong a lot in the past, is we just haven't been able to learn enough from each other, which is what the classroom space can serve for everyone.
I agree. Thank you, Sarah. Take care and have a great day.
Thanks so much.